Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to part of our Global Entrepreneurship series. You know, we had a very interesting week. We started with some great conversations. We started with project management for entrepreneurs, design thinking for entrepreneurs. We had a wonderful conversation with Sajid Hamid on cultivating the family business. Then we looked at innovation. We went on to have a great discussion on a real life entrepreneur who really, evolved, Kendall from Landeck. So it was a really nice conversation. Look out for it if you weren't live with us. And now to close off Global Entrepreneurship Week, well, I wouldn't say I should say this is one of my favorite conversations in terms of education consultancy, right? So joining me here today is Richard Sukai. So who is Richard Sukai? And of course, he will tell us why are we really going so heavily into this topic and how relevant it is for global entrepreneurship. How could education consultancy be part of this? So who is Richard? Now, I have known Richard for a very long time. And we have done a lot of work together in many different areas in education, hydroponics, all these different areas. So Richard is a career educator with over 18 years of experience. He's currently an educational consultant and advisor. Over the years, Richard has developed, facilitated, and taught a variety of education programs which have served learners of all ages and from many walks of life. Richard is actively involved in the planning and development of a student-focused empowerment program, which promotes and drives learning through innovation. So welcome, Richard. And for those of us who don't know me, my name is Shivani Sinurain. So welcome to everyone. So Richard, thanks for, being part of this conversation and having a great time. As we always say, the sweetness of learning, right? With entrepreneurship. So Richard, let's get right down to it. We're here to discuss entrepreneurship. What do you think entrepreneurship is all about? And do you believe it is a relevant concept today, entrepreneurship?
Well, Shavani, good night, and thank you for having me once again. It's a pleasure being part of this entrepreneurship series, and I'm hoping that I can be of value, added value to tonight's discussion. So your question was, what is entrepreneurship, and do I consider it to be a relevant concept today? So, what is entrepreneurship? So entrepreneurship to me there's a definition of entrepreneurship, and then there's entrepreneurship in action. And there's in my opinion, a difference between the definition of entrepreneurship on paper, the theoretical definition, which we are taught in the classrooms and universities, and then the execution of it in practice. And of course, with most things in life, there's a gap. And that gap usually involves a learning curve. For me, if I were to sum up entrepreneurship, it is in my opinion, the investment of one's time, of one's resources, of one's skill set, of one's life's ambitions, all wrapped up into a journey that may or may not lead to the original goals that you set at the beginning. It requires a lot of perseverance, a lot of navigating unexpected obstacles. Along the way, there will be successes. Some of them may be extreme. Some of them may not be extreme successes. Along the way, there may be disappointments. Some of them may be extreme. Some of them will be not so extreme disappointments. I think entrepreneurship is a really nice word that society uses to encourage persons to step out of the traditional system of work and to take control of your own life. I found that to be true to some extent but I also found it to be just as time consuming and arduous in many regards. Do I think it's a relevant concept today? That's a good question. Yes and no. I think it's relevant if you are a person who is really solid in your skill set and understand the marketability of your skill set or your product, and have a really good business plan put forth that's catering for the unexpected as much as we can. I mean, COVID kind of taught us that not having a pandemic in your business plan might not be the best idea, but then again, who plans for a pandemic, right? And we have seen the effects of COVID on many businesses of different scales in the last 3 years, and the after effects are still taking place now and will ricochet for some time. Is this something that I would encourage persons to enter? I would say yes, because I believe that in life, if we are really confident about our gifts, our skills, something that we may have a passion for, then we should pursue it. I think there's an old saying, or the cliche saying I came across many times in the last couple of years that says, imagine if you were in your last minutes on this earth, and surrounding you were all your dreams, looking at you, saying, hey, you forgot about us, and now your time is almost up. And that's the way I am pursuing my goals in the field of entrepreneurship. And I often leave persons who come to me with ideas and say, I have this big idea I dreamt up, and I really think it's going to work. I leave them with that thought. I'm like, we can't predict with certainty what's going to happen most of the time. But what is more important? Knowing that you would have pursued all of your dreams in life without regret, or being instantly successful in the most extreme way, and having a guarantee of that. And most people would say, well, I would have liked to pursue my dreams, and along the way, I would like to achieve that extreme success. But really knowing that I would have pursued my dreams is more important. So I would say, yes, it is relevant. And it's something that you should give a lot of thought to and look at it from some philosophical perspectives as well, aside from just the traditional financial aspect of looking at becoming an entrepreneur, taking control of your own life in terms of your career. I think you need to
Thanks,
share
Richard.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about entrepreneurship here and education consultancy.
Right.
I'm sure, a question that many persons may be having, and I got a question coming in on my chat here. What is the relevance, how two goes together, education consultancy or education, the business of education? How is that? Is that an entrepreneur? How is it entrepreneurial?
Well, it's entrepreneurial because exactly what you just said. Education is in fact a business. And there are many facets of education where the service that persons in the field of education can provide. And most of us may look at education as a classroom-based. But education is an entire industry that's supported by resource development. You're looking now at education becoming almost 100% digital in the world that we're living in. And of course, there's a lot of technology required to support that. A lot of training that's required to equip our modern day teachers, or teachers that are evolving now, learning technology skills that are applicable. You have, of course, the advent of using AI and the applications of AI in education. So there are many different support sectors that come with the business of education. And then, of course, you have an entire sector of student support services. So there are support for students in schools outside of the traditional school setting that is required, academic support, supplementary academic support. You look at psychological evaluations for students as an industry, but by itself, you're looking at, well, of course, your traditional after-school tutoring services. That's a mature industry in our country. And you are now branching into different technologies in education that are becoming sort of the buzzwords when you talk about science, technology, engineering, and math. There's a whole industry to support that in products and services. We talk about robotics, which is ever present. And now we're talking about the advent of AI and related technologies. So education has broadened significantly from the chalk and blackboard classroom of 20 to 25 years ago into something totally different. The student of modern day is one that will be using more digital whiteboards than traditional whiteboards, being part of more digital classrooms than traditional face-to-face classrooms, in-person classrooms. And that requires a whole shift in the resources and products and services needed to facilitate that. So we need to, if we aren't already looking at education as a sector for business potential or entrepreneurial ventures or the potential for such, then we need to start looking in that direction.
Yes, and you know, as you're speaking, what is coming to my mind is the education ecosystem. And when we understand the entire value chain, this entire ecosystem, what we can really now understand where, you know, if you're a teacher, how you can set up a business, lessons. You spoke about different products, different services, the e-learning, AI. So it's the entire ecosystem. I think it's quite an interesting topic for persons who want, and you know, we like to talk about the gig economy. So you get a gig, which is all part of the entrepreneurial.
Well, you know, Shavani, just to touch on the gig economy. The gig economy is something that exists in a lot of nations. And my take on that is when we look at the gig economy, we always look at a word that usually goes with gig, and that word is side. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because my point of view is when people are taking on a side gig, it's usually something that they are looking to make some extra income from. All right, that's usually the motivation behind it. I tend to look at a side gig as an avenue or potential for a skill set that comes to you naturally and that requires of you mentally less of a burden than maybe a traditional job requires. So I actually see that as a hint or direction in which you can look at expanding upon. The thing about it is that while that may sound utopian, the reality is that such a transition is not such a major transition from a traditional 9-to-5 job into a side gig becoming such is not as easy. You have to factor in social situations. You have to factor in family. You also have to factor in quality of life and sacrifices that you might be unexpected that come along with such a transition. So for those of us that there's an element of, we call it luck, that comes along with that transition. And I believe that a small percentage of persons who attempt that transition would be successful. However, the majority of persons who attempt such a transition may, eventually revert from it and go back to the traditional 9-to-5. But the concept of a gig, I think we should be looking at a different word for it. And we should be trying to replace side gig with something else. And while I may not have the phrase for it yet, I believe that's where the direction, if you discover that direction early enough in life and have an opportunity to pursue that side gig and go deeper with it, then we should. So that's one of the approaches I think that most persons should try to take if they can. I'm not saying just get up one day, and decide that I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go into this. I mean, that's a level of faith that few people are willing to go to, including myself. But it is a direction that you may want to look into with a little more depth than just a side gig.
Now, we spoke about the gig economy, and you said you want a better word. I'll say a project.
Yeah, well, a project. That's a possible word. I'll go with you on that.
Great. How did you approach entrepreneurship? So we know you're in, have many different businesses, you're in consultancy. How did you approach entrepreneurship?
I always knew what I was good at, so to speak. I wouldn't say always, as I knew from 10 years old. I'm not saying that. I think my gift would have found me earlier on in my career. Just out of high school into university, I realized that one thing I was good at was disseminating information in a way that people could understand. And of course, the different words for that. Teacher is one. Educator is a different level. Instructor. There's so many different words for a person who disseminates information in a way in which the audience can understand and apply. So entrepreneurship wasn't something that I set out specifically to do. It's something that evolved along my journey of pursuing something that I like to do. I did not have a business plan on paper for any of my my ventures, as you would call it. What happened with me is my skill set kind of propelled me forward. And over time, it slowly built into larger and larger versions of itself until they became what they are today, which are small to medium-sized businesses in the field of education. So for me, my journey was, I would say, non-traditional, as opposed to persons starting off today in entrepreneurship venture. They may have a business consultant that they would look at, bring on board to develop business plans, looking at financial projections, checking all the boxes on the checklist to get started, things like that. For me, it was, those things came along the way, but it was not all based on a blueprint I had in front of me. So for my journey, it's unique to me. However, it's not a journey that I can say I can give someone else the recipe for. So it's not an out of the box, so to speak, entrepreneurial story.
It just kind of occurred, just kind of happened.
It just kind of happened. And looking back now, I am not sure if that scenario were to repeat itself, if it would lead to the same outcome. No, if it would be an outcome of success. I would have hoped to approach my journey with a little more metric. But then again, COVID showed us that no matter how many metrics you can plan for, you just can't plan for the unexpected. So there is that element that's non-scientific when it comes to being successful in anything that we're doing. And I think that element is just knowing yourself, believing in the strength of what you're doing, your gift, your talent, your product, your idea, and just having that ability to stick it through, that perseverance, that stick-to-itiveness. I think that may be more of a genetic trait than something taught in a classroom.
It's just part of your gene.
Part of your gene.
Yeah.
May have to play there.
Or something you said that just triggered in my mind too, how persons might want to start into entrepreneurship. You may have just got an idea and you say it was non-traditional, you didn't have a business plan, you just got an idea and you just went for it. In terms of your education businesses that you have. You just started, you have a product and you just started to offer it. It's kind of
I started to offer one service and product, and it evolved into others that I had no idea would exist a few years later. It just sort of evolve is the word. It evolves within itself and onto itself, so to speak.
Exactly. So you just you wanted to teach, you realized that, hey, let me just try something. Started, it literally was like that, I'm sure. How
Well,
you're
it
speaking,
was like
Richard.
that.
Yeah.
It came from a 9-to-5 job of a career in teaching, of course.
Yeah.
I have paid my dues in the traditional education system, trust me. Working with students from ages level 5 all the way up to the college level, university level. And right now my consultancy expertise is within the secondary school space mostly. Programs I would have developed that are along the lines of my skill set, my core skill set based on my qualifications and background in engineering. Developing programs for students that are in line with science and technology. And that's where I'm at currently in my practice. And that's where most of my consultancy will come into play.
Great. So what are some of your key lessons? I mean, I got a lesson already. What you said, just start. Sometimes it's not non-traditional. It's not something I say, okay, it's like jewelry making, and I want to make jewelry. It's not something you really wanted. You didn't think about doing it, and you just went. So I got a few lessons already. I'm sure that's one of the lessons. Just go for it. And sometimes though, you don't have to stick to the plan. As we see, entrepreneurship is all about not following a plan sometimes. So what are some of the key
Entrepreneurship is
lessons?
about, right, so lessons. How can I say a lesson? A lesson learned. Expect the unexpected most of the time, in fact, all of the time. That way your mind stays in a way in which it's ready to adapt. If I proceed with expecting everything to go the way I expect it to go every single day, that can be very frustrating. At times, it may not happen at all, and it can be very demotivating. And I've learned to expect the unexpected at any moment, while still holding to a plan, which is I do have a plan. There are guidelines, there are milestones, there are timelines that we must adhere to. There's all of that always in play. But keeping that flexibility of expecting the unexpected helps me navigate the situations that may be a little more tricky or a little more cumbersome than I expected on a daily basis. And I think it's building one day at a time. It's really easy for us to sit down and set long-term, medium to long-term goals. But getting there is literally one step per day sometimes in getting to those long-term goals. And the challenges do come day to day. If there are challenges, if there are obstacles, if there are things that we need to recalculate for, it will be on a daily basis. Unless something major happens, which, usually is a statistically lower in occurrence. But the probability of your day not going the way you plan 100% almost certainly happens every day in some aspect of your day. So taking that approach to life and translating that expectation into entrepreneurship really helped me. That's a major lesson there. A more, I would say, basic lesson learned in entrepreneurship over the years was financial management and sound financial advice. At the start, sound financial advice along the way, making sure that I am staying up to date on the relevance of my product or service, keeping my eyes on the market, anticipated changes in market, demand, products, new ideas, the latest buzz, foreseeing 2 to 3 years in the future where my industry is projected to go. Now, all of those things are more to the forefront than they were when I just started. When I just started, I was just looking at, hey, can we get out of the red? and into the green. And of course, that takes some time, right? It took a lot longer than I thought it would. But now looking back, when we're looking at making investments, the red is not so much of an uncomfortable place anymore because we understand how to navigate the red bottom lines to get to the green bottom lines, because the experience teaches us that being in the red is not a bad place necessarily if you understand where and how long it may take to get into the green. So that's my second major lesson, understanding my finances and learning to live comfortably in the red for a period of time. I think most people get demotivated when the numbers are red. Thirdly, I would say keep an ear to the ground at all times. And sometimes that may require you to have inside information at all times on what's happening with your competitors and what directions they're looking in and why they're looking in that direction. Signals for such as well, because the signals for a change in the market environment usually happens way ahead, months, sometimes years ahead. The signals are there. However, if you're not paying attention, you will miss those signals. And then you will be playing catch up. And catch up is not a game that you want to play if you are fully invested as an entrepreneur and there's no backup plan but what you're doing. So that is keeping your eye keen, keeping your ears keen, and staying in the know by any means necessary sometimes will definitely benefit you moving forward.
Thanks for that, Richard. So lessons, definitely finances. I love what you said in terms of you have to live sometimes in the red. If it's in the red, you have to know how to not to get frustrated, because entrepreneurship, whatever, if it's in education, entrepreneurship, or any entrepreneurial venture, it's not you're not getting a paid salary every month. There are times that you may be without it in the beginning, so it's not a salary that you're dependent on every month. You may have to be. So that is a very, very correct point. What we say, you have to have belly for this kind of game, right? Because at
that's
times
one of our sayings.
Yeah, because if you don't, you will not be able to survive. And especially somebody like you who probably love to spend a lot of money and you don't have, and if you're not, you have to keep pumping it back into your business, right? So you have to learn to live in the red at times and to manage it.
Yes, you have to become friends with the red and become friends with investing. If you don't, knowing how to invest. If you don't become friends with that concept, at some point in time, it's not going to work. It's going to reach to a point where there's a roadblock, and you are going to crash and burn or fizzle away slowly.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
that's the key to surviving. The key to surviving is avoiding that crash and burn, and avoiding that slow, painful sizzle to nothing that a lot of startup companies fall prey to. And within the first 3 to 5 years, they're gone.
Yeah.
And then you study the ones that would have made it past a decade into a second decade, and sometimes into a third, and then it becomes generational. And it's not by chance. They would have navigated a lot of obstacles along the way to get to those milestones of existence. And that's where true success actually comes in. Being able, again, it comes back down to persevering, to being, having that business savvy, learning to network efficiently. And I'll add efficient to networking, because not all networking is just meeting people and having a lot of contacts on your phone. It's just having the right contacts on your phone and knowing the value of those contacts and the extent of power of those contacts. So one of the things that I didn't mention, but I'll mention it now, that have been very instrumental to me, is knowing how to leverage my networking, my investments in networking. And I call it an investment in networking. I'm not going to attend every event. at which there's going to be a bunch of business people. No, I'm going to look at that. I'm going to study who's going to be there. Is there potential there for some sort of connection for my business or field? If I'm just there because it's a bunch of business people and I don't know what exactly there is to gain from it, then it's a social event. And of course, if you're there for a social event, no problem. But if your time is really valuable to you and your time does equal to dollars and cents, then you pick and choose wisely. And you then use those events. You go to those events with purpose in mind to achieve a certain goal. And networking in itself is not a goal. So if someone says to me, hey, Richard, aren't you attending this huge conference? You know, everyone who is in business and is going to be there. I'm like, yes, it sounds nice. But who's actually going to be there? And what is the goal of this event? If the goal of this event is not something that I can find or fit my company's goals in, or find some sort of convenient or symbiotic relationship there, I'm not going. And that's a place that a lot of people need to really work on getting to.
Yes, networking
efficiently.
Correct.
Because if you network efficiently, eventually your networking will become effective. Because you want to turn that into something that has an effect, positive effect, right? So in order to do that, you must approach it efficiently. Yeah.
Stakeholder management come into mind.
But those are the nice buzzwords for it. Yeah. Stakeholder management. Yes.
So what advice would you give entrepreneurs having been in this business for over 20 years, the education business, and all different types of products, all different types of education that you are about, you know?
Yeah, I've been in, my career has spanned almost 20 years. And my business, the business aspect of my career is around 13 to 14 years. What advice would I give to those now entering our sector? You're asking me to give away trade secrets, Giovanni, or you're just asking me to give broad advice? I think you're asking me to give broad advice, right?
Broad advice.
Right. Okay, right. So for those entering the sector that I'm in, I would say one is very competitive. Be mindful, it's it's more competitive than you may think it is. It's more competitive than it appears on the surface, as most industries are. But education is one that you may not realize is just as competitive as other major industries. That's one that you should really be mindful of. Seek advice from persons in the industry who are willing to give you genuine advice. Be mindful of the advice you get from them as well, lest they become your competitor along the way. Be careful with your ideas that may be different. Be guarded with them, and also take a practical approach to it. Be pragmatic in your approach. Look for, I hate to say low-hanging fruit, but ensure that you are not setting lofty goals at the start, because that can lead to failure depending on the economic times that you're starting your business. Overreaching, overextending yourself, your resources, unless you have an angel startup, which is different, and have a lot of angel investors behind you, investment capital. If that's the case, then you can be a little more a little less risk adverse, and more risk loving. Know your level of risk taking. Understand yourself and your comfort level with risk taking, because if you don't, then that can be very, very problematic along the way, because then you can find yourself in a double-minded situation when it comes to making big decisions, because you don't understand your risk level or your risk tolerance. They call it risk tolerance. If you are unsure of your risk tolerance, education and risk management would be great. Financial risk management especially. Personal development programs can benefit you before undertaking an entrepreneurship venture, that would be a good investment of your money in yourself, because all investments in yourself do pay off at some point in time before you actually invest in brick and mortar or products and services. Invest in yourself. And those are kind of the keys to kind of staying in the middle. Stay in the middle. My risk-taking approach has been moderate for most of my ventures. There are times where I had to go into high risk, be a little bit risk loving. And there are times I had to be very risk adverse. But if you find yourself in the middle for most of the time, you do okay. But you have to know yourself. There are some sectors of the industry that you have to be able to take more risk upfront. And if you are not a risk lover and you are uncomfortable with that, then you shouldn't enter that sector of the industry at all. But a good market study, feasibility study, competitor analysis. I'm just going through the check boxes that business school would say put forward. Those things have value. They do have value. So I would say pursue those if you're unsure where to start, but you really have a passion for your idea, or have a passion for your skill set. Invest in yourself and some more knowledge first if you're unsure of how to start.
Thanks, Richard, for that. Good advice. Know how to start. Invest is risk. You have to understand your market, as you said, and yourself. That's what you were talking a lot about. You have to understand yourself. So you're in entrepreneurial educator in this type of business. Would you take this journey again?
Will I take this journey again?
And would you do anything differently?
I would do a lot of things differently. I don't know which questions to answer first. Let me answer it differently first. I think that's the one I could talk more.
Differently.
Differently. What would I have done differently? I would have invested a lot more in myself in gaining knowledge and understanding of how to approach starting a business from a practical standpoint. A lot of the classroom theories do not apply to the real world. COVID proved that. So for a lot of business people, I have been personally investing in upskilling myself in many different areas since then, and continue to do so. Even as of today, I was looking at projections for the next 10 years in my industry and looking at how I need to polish my skill set, gain new knowledge, to better equip myself to make decisions. I'm not going to rest on my laurels of my achievements in the past. I recognize them, but I also recognize the expiration date. And knowledge does have an expiration date. So we have to try to stay ahead of that expiration date of the knowledge inside of us so that we can stay ahead of the curve as much as possible. That's one of the things I would do differently. And the second thing I would do differently is I would learn to be more patient and more tolerant of myself when things don't go the way they're planned. A lot of that can be personally frustrating, psychologically negative on yourself as a confidence drainer, a motivation drain. I would say again, the word is drain. And you feel drained, your confidence is drained, your motivation is drained a lot if you are not being fair to yourself, or you're being too hard on yourself, as you would say in our society. And it all comes back to that maturity and confidence in one's ability. And that evolves over time. It never stays the same. You should be getting and growing. I say you should be growing in your confidence in who you are and who you are about in your business or your product or service. That should be growing. It shouldn't be stagnant. It should never be a point where you feel like you have mastered it all, because as long as we are alive, we keep learning. And I think that's even more relevant in the industry of education, which is about learning, keeping that open-minded approach to knowledge and adding new knowledge every year. One of the things that I do is I seek to add a new skill set that's relevant to my business every year. And if you want to call that new year resolution, so I don't like New Year resolutions, but let's say resolutions to improve for the coming year, I'm thinking about that right now. What am I going to do to increase my knowledge set? Because somewhere along the line, some of the knowledge I have is going to expire or become irrelevant, which to me is the same thing. And I'm going to have to replace it with something. So I'm thinking about that right now. And years ago, I would not have been thinking in that way. I would have been relying on a certain body of knowledge in my repertoire and using that continually and wondering why I'm not progressing at the rate at which I should. But the key factor was I wasn't sharpening the sword. The sword was just getting dull and dull and duller over time. So it goes back to one of the 7 habits of an effective leader. There's this 7 habits leadership tree. And one of the top 3 habits is sharpen your sword, your own sword. Right? So sharpening your sword is a major redo if I were to do it again. I'm sure it would have had a much more positive effect on the evolution of my ventures. Minus COVID, of course. Well, I'm not sure, no one can predict what COVID would have done, right? But I'm sure along the way it would have had a positive effect.
I like what you said, Richard, in terms of sharpening your skills and always trying. So as an entrepreneur, you always have to add more skills. Whatever is your product that you are producing, that you are selling, what is your service, you have to continuously get this better. You and I would have seen over the years that big companies, big organizations have failed because, you believe that you have the best brand and everything is the best. There's no such thing as that. The market you could change at any moment. As you said, the pandemic teaches us that anything can change very quickly. So it's a very true statement that you said. Now, I really enjoyed this conversation, and many persons, when you think of entrepreneurship and you think of business, you are not thinking about education and the ecosystem as creating many, many new businesses. The ideas always came to us, as you said, persons give lessons, you just a gig economy, the project. And you just start. So you realize that, hey, this is a market. You have all these sites, Cool now, doing these tests. And that is
homeschooling.
Homeschooling. Yes. You want a one-on-one tutor. You want, so you have it at so many different levels. You have it at you have it at primary, you have it at secondary, you definitely have it at tertiary. And so the ecosystem, and then the entire online. So there are so many different areas, and we'll have more conversations on this ecosystem and how persons can really ideate into new business. So Richard, a really, really good conversation. Any closing comments? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, actually, I would say it as an entrepreneur, just a general approach in entrepreneurship. The persons who are considering it. Talk to other entrepreneurs about their journey. That way you can get a lot of practicality in the concept of entrepreneurship. I see entrepreneurship today marketed as a buzzword, and it's part of the sales industry in the field of education itself. It's something that's promoted heavily because it's usually sold along with the promise of a lifestyle that liberates you from the traditional system. And I want to be clear that a lot of the elements of the traditional system will still be present in your journey in entrepreneurship. You're still going to work hard. You're still going to have long nights. You're still going to have a lot on your mind. You're still going to have to navigate the stress. So be mindful that sometimes you need to equate those two worlds. and really see if there is a net positive difference. Depending on the industry that you're going into, it will vary. There are some industries that the difference between the systematic world and the world that you build and control as an entrepreneur will be a large positive difference as an entrepreneur over time. There will be some. But there are some entrepreneurial ventures that the significance will be very minimal. And you may find yourselves questioning yourself along the way, hey, what is the difference in what I'm doing now on my own? Am I better off? Am I happier? Or is it just as much stress as the guaranteed 9-to-5 paycheck?
Yeah, very true.
And you really need to think about it, because it doesn't make sense shifting to something that's not better. And while we may not know if it's going to be better, your research on the success of others who are in that industry can be a key indicator. So look at those in that industry, try to study that market and see what sort of return there is on the investment of your time. Time most important, because that's the most valuable currency we have. You can't get that back. You cannot print that, print free. You can't do anything. Once time is gone, it's gone. That is the most valuable currency you can gain from being an entrepreneur. More of your time. If you're not gaining at least that, more time for yourself or control over your time, then I would really seriously reconsider any entrepreneurial venture. That's the very minimum you should gain, that currency of time for yourself, that freedom, that ability to control every single minute of your day. Second to that, of course, we all love the bank, the increase in value, right? We want to see that money rolling in, right? But if we can't, at the very least, sometimes the money may not roll in. Sometimes a pandemic might pop up. Sometimes an unexpected life occurrence might pop up, and the money stops rolling in. And then you have to say, what's left? And if that currency of time is not there, then you really need to look at what you're doing. Because just earning money is not enough. That currency is not as valuable as the currency of time. Think about that. And that's what I'll leave you all with in terms of a takeaway tonight.
Currency of time. I love that.
Currency of time.
So great, Richard. And I know we'll continue with this conversation because it's a different type of talk for entrepreneurial and business, the ecosystem for education, where people can fall in. Persons are looking for getting new jobs, starting up new jobs. And it is a field that really can do that for us. So thank you, Richard, as usual, for some really great conversation. We have Mala, who said, thank you for this education. Appreciate it. Good night, Ms. Sinarayan and Mr. Sukai. Right. Thank you, Mala, and all the best to you, Richard. Signing off, everybody, until we talk again. The business of education.
Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.